U.S. deadline for Russia to end its war in Ukraine or face economic punishment expiring today, but no clarity on whether Washington will deliver on its threat, given plans by both countries to hold a presidential summit. But no certainty on that either, with the Kremlin claiming finer details have been settled, with talks due soon, but Washington suggesting on its end that nothing had been finalized. Mr. Trump saying he is ready to speak to Mr. Putin, even if the Russian leader does not sit down with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, contradicting earlier reports that would have been a prerequisite for this summit. The shift in position casting doubt over whether Mr. Zelenskyy will take part in talks. Mr. Trump's response to queries on where Washington stands on the deadline and new measures are not helping either, with the U.S. leader saying that was up to Vladimir Putin.
A lot of very positive things going to come out.
And well, let's bring in our correspondent Dasha Chernyshova from Moscow and Jagruti Dave from Washington, D.C. Let's start with you, Dasha. Dasha, Mr. Trump, we're hearing there saying whether the deadline holds, whether those are economic punitive measures also hold, that would depend on Mr. Putin. How has Russia reacted to that?
Well, Moscow is quite confident in its resources, and Russia has long been saying that what is important at this stage is that Russia achieves the goals of what it has been calling its special military operation in Ukraine, and the threat of sanctions and any restrictions have always been brushed off. In the meantime, we understand that Moscow is quite eager to hold the presidential summit between President Vladimir Putin and US President Donald Trump, with Putin the day before saying that both sides have expressed lots of interest in such a summit. And Moscow is now saying that this summit is being prepared. The expectation is that it would be held as early as next week. And we've heard that there have been lots of diplomatic exchange between the Russian president and his international allies, including Chinese President Xi Jinping, in the phone conversation, according to which we understand they have been talking about what has been discussed at the Kremlin earlier this week, when U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff traveled to Moscow for talks with Vladimir Putin. And Putin has indeed briefed other international leaders, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, the president of Kazakhstan, as well as Alexander Lukashenko, the president of Belarus. All of those conversations, we understand, were related to what has been discussed, and also international partners are now saying that they welcome that there is dialogue on the Ukrainian settlement. So there is lots of optimism in Moscow with the possibility of this meeting taking place, and also the results of this meeting actually being positive for Russia.
All right, Dasha, that meeting might take place with the U.S. leader. Russia is keen on that, but Mr. Putin less keen on meeting with the Ukrainian president in what had been proposed earlier as a three-way, a trilateral summit. If Mr. Zelenskyy is not there to discuss these operations in his country, how that might affect any deal to end the fighting?
Well, from the Russian perspective, it is not up to the Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelenskyy to ultimately decide on this conflict. Moscow has long been saying that it is fighting with the Western countries, and therefore the perception in Moscow is that it is important to make a deal with the United States. In the meantime, we've heard the Russian president suggesting that he's open for dialogue and even for a meeting with Vladimir Zelenskyy, the president of Ukraine. But that would require certain conditions to be met, and that is not the case, at least at this stage. The conditions being in this situation, the possibility of having some sort of a document to be signed in this possible meeting between Putin and Zelenskyy. And we have seen the negotiating process progressing slowly, and there's been no progress on finding the common ground for these two sides to agree on how to end this conflict. So the perception in Moscow is that it needs to decide with the Western countries, particularly with the United States, and then any negotiating process will be sped up should those talks with Trump be successful.
Oh, thanks, Dasha. Let's head to Jagruti Dave in Washington, D.C. Jagruti, we're hearing from Dasha that from the Russian point of view, the conditions are not there for a meeting between Mr. Putin and Mr. Zelenskyy, but the conditions are there for Mr. Putin to meet Mr. Trump. That said, both sides, Washington and Moscow, not agreeing on the finer details of this proposed summit. What has been agreed?
Well, I think the fact that both sides can't really even see eye to eye on a time and location for this meeting yet, I think just shows how complex these negotiations to end the war in Ukraine are and how complex it is to set up a meeting with the Russian leader. Now, the White House is saying that no date and no location has been set, although there are suggestions that a meeting is happening in the coming days. As we heard from Dasha there, the Russians saying that, a meeting, a location, potentially the United Arab Emirates has been set as a location, but there are other countries that could also be playing host to this long-awaited meeting. If it does happen, those countries, including Saudi Arabia, potentially Turkey, that has been involved in a lot of these negotiations and mediations between Russia and Ukraine. But what if a meeting like this does happen, it would be the first time that a Russian leader and an American leader have met in person since a 2021 meeting between President Biden and Putin in Geneva. What we are looking at is Donald Trump and the White House saying that the Russians instigated the meeting, the Russians saying that it doesn't matter who instigated the meeting, that it would be appealing for both sides for this meeting to take place. So very little actually known about the meeting other than there is an openness for it to take place.
Jagruti, as you say, if they fail to agree even at this point on the schedule and venue for this meeting, far more complex would be actually ending the war, given that the issues that underpin this war are decades old. What are the challenges, if you could very briefly summarize them, for Mr. Trump in his bid to end the war in Ukraine?
Yeah, the challenges are substantial. As you say, even if a meeting takes place, there's no guarantee that it would end the war. In fact, many of the Europeans are suggesting that President Putin's agreeing to talks is merely a delaying strategy to get him, to give him and his troops a chance to really regroup their strategy. But, the main challenge is that this threat of sanctions that Donald Trump has levied against Russia, that trying to hold talks whilst threatening sanctions at the same time, again, the suggestion that Donald Trump has avoided doing sanctions because he worries that it would prevent President Putin from coming to the table in the first place. The other thing is that the question of whether President Putin will agree to anything and whether you can trust his word. Donald Trump previously had quite cordial relations with the Russian leader, but since in the last few months, he has realized that President Putin is a tricky customer. So really, whether anything can be agreed to and whether the Russian leader can be trusted to agree to his word, those are just some of the challenges in place here.
Well, thanks. Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow, Jagruti Dave in Washington, D.C., looking at the immediate challenges of just hosting a summit and the longer-term challenges of possible economic punishment and ending a war that's gone on for 3.5 years.